men have to understand you're capable of harm, even if you don't intend it.
I went to jail, but what's funny is everyone said, "Run, the police is coming," and I was like, "Guilty people run," because in my head that wasn't.
And you weren't guilty in your head.
In my head, I'm like, this is self-defense, right?
So if you had coloured braids, you're getting sent home. But if you had dyed your hair blonde, you'll be fine. Like if you're a white child, so it's like even like that creative expression is policed.
Unpacked. Young people and violence with me, Richie Bray. Thank you all for joining me today on this podcast. It's important we have this conversation because up until now, we've looked at the experiences of men and boys, the fear of men and boys, what life is like for men and boys when it comes to youth violence. And girls' voices often get missed. So thank you for joining me. For people who don't know who you are, I'm going to let them know who you are. So I've got barrister with me, Ife Thompson, and also founder of Blam UK, correct?
That's correct,
Yes,
indeed.
Thank you so much. I've also got Marvyn Harrison, who is a podcaster, he's an author, and just an all-round champion of the black community generally. And last but not least, of course, Lady Unchained, poet here who has had lived experience of the criminal justice system and of course can speak really well to the experiences of girls. When we're speaking about girls, and I wonder, did you feel like there were a set of rules around what being a girl or being a woman is?
I feel like I didn't really follow those rules. I was always like a tomboy. I grew up with the man them. Like I only learned how to do certain things later on in life. Like I feel like I was forced to wear skirt and comb my hair in slick positions. Other than that, I was like bandana. However, I am a girl. I grew up as a female. So there was different things that I had to follow, like obviously learning how to navigate around men, learning how to navigate around violence, and also seeing violence and knowing how and when not to get involved, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean?
I want to take a step back to what you said, because you spoke about how to navigate around men. You spoke about how to navigate around violence. I mean, was there ever a moment where you realised there were certain places that you couldn't go, there were certain clothes that you couldn't dress in?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, growing up in South London, it's a bit different, I guess. So I feel like I always wore tracksuits and big jumpers because I didn't want to show my figure. Growing up, my mum told me, boys get you pregnant. And so I stayed away from boys until I became friends with boys and then realised actually there's boys that can be your friends without the fear of them wanting more. And then going into different areas, I think, again, having to remember that I am a female. And if I dress a certain way in that particular area, people might see me as a little gangster kind of girl. So, yeah, things are a little bit different.
And I find it interesting what you're saying because you're navigating the ways in which you want to dress, who you are, the things that make you feel comfortable, and the way that's seen by society, and the ways that you don't want to dress, and how that's also seen by society. And when you're labelled as a tomboy, there's all of these kind of ideologies that come with that. Like you're a gang member, you're dressed like this.
Exactly. I think what was interesting was when my mum and sister kind of was like, you need to stop dressing like this. Like, we want you to dress like a girl. And I was like, I do. I am a girl though, you know? And it was like a whole moment where they woke me up extra early, gave me a skirt. I said, "Where?" Like, so well gone for the rest of it. Like, do you get what I'm saying? Like, where's the rest of the skirt? And they were like, this is the skirt you're wearing to school. And I remember even going to school and everyone's like,
it just wasn't you.
Like, what's happening? Is everything okay? And I'm like, no, it's not, clearly.
I think you're saying something really poignant there, and that is the removal of self-identity. I wanted to bring you in, Marvyn, because you're a father, you have a daughter. Do you see a difference in the way girls and boys are raised? And does that difference show up in your own household?
Yeah, I always think about in the beginning, I was like, I'm going to raise my children gender neutral. And I was really clear on that. And what that meant to me, to be specifically, was more just, I'm not going to inform anything on you. I'm not going to code you with any understanding of what it is that you choose. We're just going to allow you to choose. And my daughter went from hating everything shiny, glossy, glittery, unicorny to only wanting to wear that. And it just happened overnight. No one gave it to her. No one told her anything. It just happened. And it made me really understand that there is a deeper socializing and programming, that there is maybe something innately that you're attracted to or you're not. It's your thing or it's not. And I think now when I think about my daughter, what I'm trying to create is someone who is free to choose. And she's 8, so we'll see what that creates. But the goal is that she's informing it. I'm listening for like clues so I can coach it and mold it, but I'm not shaping it from my own perspective, which is something that has to constantly be assessed even for myself, to be like, am I molding you or am I like helping you? There's a difference.
If I want to bring you in here, I mean, you're a lawyer, but, you know, you spoke about Blam UK,
Oh.
Yes.
which is all about black learning and achievement. It's done lots of work in schools. What's the common thread in the schooling system?
Yeah, so one thing that we definitely see is there's a culture of anti-blackness in schools that black children are subject to, which means that there's a lot of work that we have to do for black boys and black girls to enable themselves to feel seen. So in terms of like gendered anti-blackness or misogynoir, we often find like it's the way in which black children are perceived and what they do is perceived. So we find like we have like high levels of exclusion for like black girls kissing their teeth. And like that's a form of cultural expression that's used to black.
I saw people
blackness.
react to it.
Yeah. So you're
yeah,
seeing
yeah.
like black ways of like expressing yourself is penalised in a different way. Or we had a young black child who they said that they thought that she had weed on her, but it was actually a roll-up that someone had given to her that had some cannabis in it. And what the school did, they stripped her to her bra. The teachers
Wow.
did that. Yeah, and
How humiliating.
how humiliating. And it was just after child Q situation. So there's this idea of like black children being dehumanized, but particularly black girls. And there's no sort of seeing their innocence or protecting them, because I don't see in what capacity, even if they had weed on them, why would you need to strip them down to their bra as a teacher?
When these experiences happen in these organisations, when they're excluded from school, when they're put in isolation because they're kissing their teeth, something that is culturally relevant to them, what kind of gap does that leave open, and what can fill those kind of gaps for those girls?
So in terms of, I guess it's the way that you perceive yourself. So if you're seeing that anything that is normalised to your experience, the way you speak, the way you show up in the world is something to be excluded, it's something to be punished, then you're going to end up having low levels of racial esteem, because the way in which you manoeuvre in the world is penalised. I mean, we haven't even spoken about hair, but we see how black girls' hairs are policed. There's a school in South London that would ban coloured hair. So if you had coloured braids, you're getting sent home. But if you had dyed your hair blonde, you'll be fine. Like if you're a white child. So it's like even like black creative expression is policed. So it's like they're trying to take away anything that particularises you as a black child.
I think you touch on something really poignant there. So you speak about low racial self-esteem. When you think about self-esteem in general, you know, low self-esteem makes girls easier to exploit. I've used this term safety a lot. I mean, what does safety even mean?
I feel like we're still learning what that looks like, if I'm honest. Like I've done talks in prisons where I spoke about violence against women and girls, and specifically talking about women in prison. And there was a moment where the men in the prison that I was talking to kind of like realised, they were like, hold on a minute. So me walking behind a woman at night, not even registering that they're walking behind that woman. The woman's obviously registered that there's a man walking behind me. And now I've got to maybe put my keys in my hand or, you know, have my phone ready to call somebody. They never thought about it like that. Do you get what I'm saying? So I feel like men also and young boys need to understand what safety looks like, because I think the lines have been blurred. Like I feel uncomfortable walking at certain times of night. I feel like, you know, if there's a road that I can take that's more lit, I would walk on that road instead of like taking a shortcut into like an alleyway or something, just because I'm like, well, actually, I don't know what's on the other side of the alley. So I think safety looks different to everybody, but if you're coming from different backgrounds, some of us don't feel safe, full stop. So it goes back to teaching what safety should be and understanding how women have been followed, stalked, abused in the household, on the streets, you know, killed. Like there's so many different ways that women are going through certain things like that's unsafe. So we need to go back to teaching.
Marvyn, I wanted to bring you in. I mean, when we think about women and girls, what does safety even mean?
So like from my perspective, I understood the challenge that women were facing really, really late in life. And I think up until my late 20s, I grew up in a matriarch home, and they had created a system in our family through the aunts and the wider family to navigate men that I just saw happiness vibes, singing Deborah Cox, you know, and like having and organizing family. So I was like, wow, they've got community in a way that I've never seen that in men. So I was thinking like, oh, how do I borrow some of these elements in my world? And and it wasn't until really late 20s that I got the and it's when I launched Dope Black Dads, the intensity of understanding. And then as I went back in my own story, even like there being a girl gang that was akin to the boy gang, and it was like, we brought them in and was like, yeah, you should be like us. But we think that we were involving them in like our thing. Like, we think we're giving you equity in our decision, but what we're actually doing is exposing you to a whole world of stuff that was just really badly wrong. So when I went back and I started going through the moments and emotions of things that happened, I understood. And I think the thing that saved me from really the forefront of understanding it is I was slightly removed. My mum had coached me on certain things to look out for. And that's what my saving grace was. She just gave me enough information to be like, that doesn't look right. So when I think about safeguarding women now, it's actually 5-7 layers before the kind of obvious things. It's not about just like, I didn't do anything. It's actually even energetically how you present yourself in a space where women are. You have to think about what that is, because it activates a fear, an insecurity, a challenge in like, what's this man really about?
You know, you speak to a really good point around how the behavior of men bring women in and girls in specifically. And sometimes it's men bringing girls in. It's not boys just bringing girls in, it's men as well, but exposing them to harm. And there's a responsibility to have those conversations. If I wanted to bring you in here, I mean, when we do talk about safety specifically, what do we mean?
Yeah, so I think sometimes we individualize issues when these are systemic issues like patriarchy. These are issues of like misogyny. And I think sometimes when we focus on individuals too much, we don't look at the overall system and thinking about how we can bring that into conversations about safety.
I don't want to interrupt you, but for people who are listening to this and maybe don't understand the terms, what you're saying here is rather than this being individual, this is a structure and a system in which we live in that has an impact on us collectively. And misogynoir, for people who are listening to that and have never heard the term, what does that mean? You said misogyny, and we know that affects all women.
So it's
misogynoir for people who don't know.
Specific hatred of black women, but it also, I would say, applies to black women at all stages of life, so even black children, black girls. And I think what's particularly important is the way in which black women maneuver through society and experience misogyny means that it's misogyny combined with racism. So it's a combination of the two oppressions intertwining as well. So that's just what it means. But just in terms of thinking about safety, I think that it's particularly important that if we're looking at things that make women unsafe, we have to undo the ideologies that enabled these sort of violence to be in place. I feel like when we talk about violence against women and girls, it's often talked about interpersonal, but I think systemic violence is the way in which these platforms and ideologies are masked under the system of patriarchy, and that means that women aren't safe. So I think in order for us to really be safe, we have to get rid of patriarchy, and we have to have conversations around that, but also like, what does safety designed by young women look like and girls? Because
to give them a say in the process.
Because I think often when we talk about it, it's people talking at young people, talking at girls, opposed to like, what do we need to make you feel safe as well? And I think that is an important conversation. I also think letting them be aware of their own oppression, because I think often we try to skirt around it, we don't talk about it, but the reason why we have violence towards women and girls is because of patriarchy. The person that's most likely to kill you is your partner, right? So we have to be having conversations like that. Like, the biggest killer of black women in this country is their partner. And it's like the only recourse that we have to safety is the police and policing. And black people already have a long history of ongoing police violence to our communities. Thinking about, one, how do we undo patriarchy? What does that look like? But also having conversations, and then also practically, what can we do in terms of making environments feel safer?
This is a good point to bring Ebinehita in, put on our headphones, because this is what Ebinehita has dedicated her life to. Thank you for joining me. Let people know about what you do. I've alluded to what it is you do in terms of your work, but let everybody who's listening know.
Hi, so I'm Ebinehita Iyere. I'm the founder and managing director of Milk Honey Bees, and we are a creative and expressive safe space for black girls to put her first, which is healing, empowerment and resilience. We work at the intersection of race and gender, and the reason why we do the work that we do essentially is to give black girls a space for them to be seen, heard and exercise and feel safe.
If we speak about black girls specifically, they're stereotyped often as stronger or more grown. What gets missed because of that?
Well, first of all, that stereotype is a form of adultification. So let's eradicate that stereotype. But what gets missed is that black girls are fearful, they're powerful, their voices need to be heard, but also they're growing up in environments where they are mobilizing as well as growing. And what I mean by that is, if we look at statistics that everybody knows about Black boys and violence, Black boys being disproportionately affected by the criminal justice system, as well as Black boys being disproportionately affected by exclusion, I always leave the question, where are the Black girl counterparts? Which means that in our communities right now, we have a lot of grieving young Black boys, but the people that they turn to, that are their therapists, their youth workers, their support system, are the Black girls that they are growing up with platonically or unplatonically, which then also misses out the girls who are exploited. But these girls that are exploited are also playing so many different roles. So really and truly, what really is missed outside of that safety and psychological is the mobilization that Black girls continuously have to do in their community, and how that trickles into adulthood. And there's no kind of space or gap where these girls are told that actually you don't need to do this. There's professionals that do these type of roles, if that makes sense.
Ife spoke a bit earlier on about girls not even knowing that they're being exploited. When we use the term exploitation, what does that look like within the framework of Black girlhood?
That's a big question. How long have we got? So in the shortest form, it's exploitation can happen in so many different ways. It's a form of being treated unfairly and unjust without you knowing, but it also is a form of harm that you experience directly and or indirectly. And the reason why I'm kind of giving brief terms like this is because you can be exploited financially, physically, emotionally, psychologically. There's so many different forms of exploitation, as well as unknown exploitation, which is where you're just participating in something and navigating something, but you've been so coerced and you then believe it's your norm without understanding the harm that it's actually causing you until later on down the line, which again is something that is missed for Black girls, because the environments in which they grow up with, the kind of connections in which they have, when I spend time speaking to them, it's like, oh, it's a norm. But when you really break it down, it's like, actually, I've been treated unfairly, I've been treated unjust, I've been coerced, and now this is borderline or actually is exploitation. And I think that sometimes we need to be mindful as professionals, which is where I use the term borderline exploitation. We need to be very mindful as professionals, because not every girl is exploited. I think that we have a thin line between victimization and exploitation that still is yet to be explored. I think that those girls are victims and products of their own environment, in which the males that get them involved and that they show up for are predominantly exploited, but not knowing they're exploited. And then that, you know, when you're between girlhood and womanhood, there is that nurturing ability. So whether you're nurturing from a point of physical or nurturing from an emotional stance, those girls who get missed tend to be the nurturers of the community physically, because they can go out there and they can fight and things like that, but they get missed. But they are truly victims of the community experience. They are grieving just as much as the boys. Like, we all remember that term, I am my brother's keeper. And I think that sometimes that term, when it was put into the community, wasn't really broken down into what it actually means, which is why mobilization for these girls has so many strands that people haven't understood. But the easiest one for people to understand and even sympathize with is the girls that are exploited. And my heart definitely goes out to them. But I also want us to hold space for the girls who are victims of unknown exploitation. Also, let's acknowledge that boys can be exploited as well. And I think that if we start to have that conversation, we will start to really look at what exploitation looks like from a girl and a boy. Because whoever, the 15-year-old boy can't just exploit the 13-year-old girl. The 15-year-old boy is being exploited from somewhere.
If I wanted to bring you in here, I wonder, you know, a lot of these dynamics that we've mentioned that Ebinehita spoke to, how do you see them reflected? As a lawyer yourself, a barrister, how do you see them reflected in the criminal justice system?
Yes, so I practice in youth courts across the UK, and in my practice, I would say almost 90% of the girls that are represented are Black. Normally, youth justice is all about diversion, trying to make sure young people don't even get into the criminal justice system. But what we see that when it's with Black girls, they almost like railroad you through that system. And I found with the majority of the cases that I've also been dealing with, they are subject to identification, but also like high levels of police violence. So I had a case where there was a young girl who was accused of stealing something, and the first reaction from the security guard was to use excessive violence towards her. I mean, the violence that I had seen in that footage was so much that as a professional watching it, I cried.
Wow.
Like, the levels of violence was unheard of for me. And she was a child that was also in care, that had history of sexual violence. So there's
much.
always those things interacting, and every single person that inflicted violence on her was a man. So that there wasn't even that care to think, what did this child, because this was a child, what did they go through? Why may they be reacting like this? Almost no care to find out whether she had any mental health issues, any mental health concerns, any history of mental health. While she was in that prison cell, she had attempted suicide. And they left her on the footage for like almost, I think, maybe like 2-3 minutes before they even noticed that she'd attempted to commit suicide. And when they came in and took all her clothes from her, they literally had men in the room, male officers in the room.
And she's never felt safe around
Yes,
them.
male officers in the room. Well, this child was subject to a strip search effectively. And so when I looked at that case and did that case, one thing that I could see constantly is that there's this idea that this young person, this child, that they are much more fast, much more forward, know much more, therefore we don't need to protect her. There was no, at any time I've mentioned, there was no appropriate adult with her. No one, yes, from the moment she was arrested to she was in the cells, there was no appropriate adult around until almost the next day. Like, there was no one for her to feel safe around.
I mean, this scares me. I think sometimes we have this, what do I want to say? This utopian view of systems in that they work the way they're meant to. And if things go wrong, we need more policing and more systems, and the children will be safer that way. I mean, do you see systems actually sometimes creating and reinforcing the harm for women and girls in the way that Ife just mentioned there?
Definitely. I think that we all do. And you might not hear many founders say this. I think that's something that we need to acknowledge is if the system does it, us as the community, we also do it. Maybe more unintentionally than the system. But I think that what Ife described is if this girl's needs were managed or understood right from primary school, she may not have entered the criminal justice system. But if there was an understanding of what she needed, who she was, and there was a way that, we all grew up with that red book. Like, I kind of describe that red book as something that should have followed us right up until adolescence, so that it was connected to every single system. So if this girl did enter the criminal justice system, whether she was a first attendance or not, there's just something that would flag up that says she has had X, Y, and Z experience, which means that whoever is dealing with her is still able to do their job. Because, the first thing that the police are going to say is that we have a job to do. Okay, cool, do your job. But it doesn't mean doing your job means lack of care. And I think that's where the system blurs the line. The system talks about doing a job and working for all, but it does that from a perspective where care is not involved. And then they bring in community organizations, and we have to hold so much. But holding also causes harm, because when you can't hold anymore and you have to let go, you're actually just as bad as the system.
When women and girls do go to the police for help, where are the gaps and what do you think isn't working?
Well, one of the biggest gaps is how police respond to women and girls that go to the police. I think there are so many different incidents that I've dealt with where the police have dealt with said girl or said woman the same type of way. It's just like a one lens fits all. And I think that that's really detrimental. But also I think that, again, it's that care, it's that lack of training, but it's also when you have the training, not applying the training to how you do your role or how you do your job. But I think for me, what needs to be done, and I've always said this, is we need more specialized kind of roles in those systems that are specifically dedicated to supporting the needs of young women and girls. I think we spend a lot of time blaming the policing system, but you also have social workers, you have early help professionals, you have teachers, you have head teachers who spew this kind of negative understanding and ideology of the experience of young women and girls. And what makes it worse is if they grow up in certain areas, or if they are from a certain demographic or ethnicity, they are hit the worst with the stereotype and the non-belief. And those non-belief trickle into lack of safety, because if the person who's meant to keep you safe doesn't believe you, who really does?
Ebinehita Iyere, I just want to thank you so much for joining us.
No worries. Thank you all so much for having me. And I'm so blessed and hopeful for the work that we're all doing around this table, but also for the work of women and girls. So thank you.
So it was great hearing from Ebinehita Iyere there on the experiences of girls and women, or young women specifically. But what I am thinking about is, and I think Marvyn, you touched on this a bit earlier on, the impact from men and boys and how they behave and how this impacts on young girls. I've got a stat here that I think is important to read out, and it says research from the University of Bristol and the NSPCC shows that 25% of girls aged 13 to 17 have experienced the use of physical force, that's pushing, slapping, hitting, or being held down in a relationship. Marvyn, you do a lot of work around this. How and when are boys learning about girls' consent and power?
I think there's been a misunderstanding of the journey of when men become radicalized. And I think it happens, there are indicators that happen over a long period of time. And then there's a switch where there's an injustice that are being filled. When you sit and speak with young boys, in their minds, they are not the powerful ones. And women develop a language a lot earlier, develop awareness of themselves significantly earlier. And in their minds, they're fighting against the advancedness of a woman or young girl, sorry, to make it be very, very clear. And what we're trying to do with young men is reframe what's happening for them, because to them it's powerlessness, and it doesn't manifest in terms of them being an aggressor and being stronger. And like, you know, even in primary schools, we're seeing younger girls who are pushing, pulling, fighting younger boys, and they don't know what to do. They don't know what's fair. They don't know what's right. Teachers are misunderstanding the interaction, and it's creating an imbalance that's not being diagnosed and spoken about. And then they're hearing language of toxic masculinity, which is really reductive and dehumanizing to boys in terms of what's happening for them. So it's very difficult when you talk about what's happening for boys. It can sound like you're minimizing the experiences of women. And so we've never really had a position where we've been able to have a whole conversation at once, where both sides can talk about what they're experiencing and there's space to be heard. Because at the end, we always view like the only ones being harmed are women. There are loads of men who sign up to patriarchy, young boys sign up to patriarchy, and it harms them. I think patriarchy is designed to control young boys and to develop their outcomes. And in that, there is a part where women are completely dismissed. That cycle has not been interrupted in generations. And so there are times where even like men like myself, when I'm speaking to women at particular points, but I don't use the same language to speak to women that I do when I'm speaking to young boys. We need to remove things like the concept of toxic masculinity and more frame it around male bravado and give it the correct language, the correct diagnosis, the correct solutions. And in that is a very powerful solution about how you engage young women, young girls, and even women and girls when you get older, and what the cause of that is.
And how do you think this shows up? I mean, if we're talking about girls' safety and women's safety, how do you think this shows up in the dynamics of relationships and sex, essentially? Because you speak about powerlessness. How is that powerlessness, and why is that powerlessness sometimes leveled and directed towards young girls and women?
Yeah, look, it's really scary when you look at the role of things like pornography, when you look at the role of adultification and mandingifying men as well in a so strange way. A lot of men have lost their virginity really young to older women, and then that infers how they then treat women of their same age group later on. And so when I talk about what the solution is, it's very, very narrow in terms of what men need or young boys need. And then we go into a place of trying to educate how you manage and interact with somebody who is a woman, and it's a completely different set of tools you have to use. But it's those tools that are underdeveloped intentionally in young boys, so they continue to contribute to patriarchy and to capitalism. And we never look at why that pipeline continues uninterrupted. And so I feel every time I feel hyper conscious of like, I never want a woman to listen to what I'm saying here and feel like they're not centered. But in many ways, the solution has to be anchored on a pro-male awareness of like what your life can be like and the kind of relationships you can have with women when you're in control and you understand them, versus sort of responding and reacting to a sort of bravado-led interpretation of what women can be. And I think even for me, again, I talk about how I discovered late. My life is littered with incredible women partnerships in different dynamics. and it's made my life richer. And so many young men have no idea what that even looks like. They're still having conversations of like, can you be friends with girls? And it's just like, brother, you're missing out on an abundance of experiences. Yeah, like, but that's what I mean. And we're like, we don't know how to reach that group of people because you're actually a grown-ass man. And by the way, using language like girls when you're 40, 50 years old. So there is a long tail piece of work that needs to be done. And women, specifically black women, become the consequence of that underdevelopment. And again, we talked about you as well, just coming from a place where you have to stand in things and constantly confront men for their lack of awareness and the impact that they're creating. It becomes a full-time job.
You speak about pro-male conversations or, pro-male approaches. I mean, these have been co-opted by really bad faith actors.
Yes.
I mean, a stat here, a 2024 report by Hope Not Hate found that 41% of young men aged 16 to 24 had a positive view of Andrew Tate. And I mean, Andrew Tate's often used as an example. There are many men that push misogynistic rhetoric that ends in harm against girls and women. I mean, if so many young men are engaging with this kind of content,
I think it's disingenuous to focus on Andrew Tate, and he gets used way too much when Donald Trump exists, right?
Yes.
And you're talking about the highest office in the world, being considered the leader of the free world, and having every single human charge that you can think of that should be disgusting from everyone's perspective, and it's not being treated as such. And I think like Andrew Tate exists because Donald Trump exists. And I feel like we often like glorify that, and then you kind of create this archetype of a good guy that is just, I'm just not Andrew Tate, right? Which is a really low bar to set everybody. And
really low.
Like really low.
Yeah. I mean, in the pits of hell low.
Listen, one of the things I say to men is that men have to understand you're capable of harm, even if you don't intend it. Even me, I have to be super aware that if I walk into a space, I have to be present to what I could be creating for somebody else. And just because I'm vibes and I'm smiling, like, it doesn't mean that I can't create it. And I think men don't understand the capacity for harm that they have in them, that's programmed in them. And I think when we listen to the messages that we get and the celebration of that type of masculinity is absolutely disgusting. And it happens across all of our media landscape, our film landscape. If you think we're all raised on James Bond, who would like grab a woman, kiss her, throw her on the bed, then they'll be smoking a cigarette and she'll be like, oh, James. And you'll be like, oh, yeah, that's what you do then.
Like dismissing.
Listen,
dismissive
the
of
Arnold
her as a
Schwarzeneggers,
person.
the Van Dammes, all of that like hyper masculinity is programmed into all of us.
In listening to you speak and having conversations, it makes me think about silence. And Lady Unchained, I wanted to bring you in here. What I've noticed with a lot of young girls and women is silence. And I wonder what a lot of young girls and women are having to weigh up before speaking. So I've done youth work myself, and sometimes the young guys are the loudest inside the room. And then when you ask a girl not to speak up for herself, like, go on, talk then. But even if you ask some of these girls their opinions on things, it's just, you can just tell there's like a frozenness. They'll get a bit comfortable and start talking later on, but there's this frozenness. Where do you think that silence comes from? And what do you think so many girls and women are weighing up before they decide to speak?
If it's safe to speak. And I think, even because obviously criminal justice as well, and you're talking about people being convicted of all these things, but no one ever really looks at what's happened before this crime was committed. So if you're looking at a woman who's been to prison, it's okay, she stole, she did this, but in her childhood, she's been through so many things. So there's so many things to unpack. And because that's never been allowed, they don't know how and when it's okay to speak about that. So I work with a lot of male artists that I support. And like you said, they're very loud, they're confident, like they get to that point where they want to talk about certain things. But when it comes to the women, sharing their story means who's in the space, who am I, who has been through what I've been through. We need to create a circle in order for them to actually speak around other women first before they can then go and speak. There's a fear of like speaking out if you've been through domestic violence and you've finally, avoided this ex-partner who has been abusing you for so many years. And then you speak about it in an interview publicly that then goes on whatever social media, and then your ex finds you because they haven't seen you for so long and now you're speaking about it. And you do have, unfortunately, men who are like, oh, she's still speaking about me, she must still care. And so now they're trying to find that woman. So there's that fear of, am I allowed to speak about this? Because if I do it, what are the consequences? We think about coercive control and how it's finally being acknowledged. But these are women who have been through these things for so many years. And it's only now that they're being seen and heard and being told, actually, you wasn't meant to go through that.
And talking of going through that, Lady Unchained, I want to speak a bit about your experience, right? So, you know, being sent to prison at the age of 21, and you write and speak so powerfully about it. Do you think girls and women, based on your experience, because I'm interested to hear about that, are given less space to be complex? Because it feels like you're either forced into this, you're a good woman and a good girl, or you're a bad woman and you're a bad girl. And for me and all the girls that my sister was very complex, actually. I mean, we didn't really speak much about that. She was a road gal, and she was my sister was known for fighting boys. But that came from really complex issues. She was a very, God rest her soul, she passed away a few years ago, but she was a very loving person, but also very complex. And her fighting wasn't a representative of all of who she was.
Yeah.
But people were always like, she's either bad or she's good. Did you feel like you were placed into a particular box with your experience of going to prison?
I feel like
Look at your
what's funny
smile already. Why are you smiling at me?
I'm smiling because I'm always smiling, and that's funny because like even when I started talking about my story, like people are like, "Why is she always smiling?" Like, because I'm just a happy person, innit? But when you go through certain experiences, like I guess like again, I don't know why I keep saying South, but South, like you don't smile too much. Like I remember like having to go into Peckham, and I'd have to call my half sister, like, "Yo, I'm coming to your ends. Like, be ready."
Lady Unchained, what is your story?
Like, okay, so let's talk about this. So obviously, I went to jail at the age of 21. I was arrested at 20, but my older sister was attacked in a nightclub by 3 other women. And I actually tried to wait because they're security, that's their job, they're being paid to do what they need to do. But no one done nothing. So what that meant was that I had to protect my sister. Like, I come from a family where we're all about protecting. Our mums told us, look after each other, make sure you look after each other.
Culturally, that's what we're told.
I've got my little sisters, I've got my older sister, I've got my brother, like, you know, and I didn't need to join no gang because my family, if you want to call it that,
we are a gang.
We are a gang. You get it? So we're looking after each other. So if I see my older sister being attacked by 3 women and I've actually acknowledged that they've kind of like shifted in order to get closer to my sisters, I've watched her walk away and no one does anything. It's my job to then protect her. And so that's what I done. Unfortunately for me, you know, I went to jail. But what's funny is everyone said, "Run, the police is coming." And I was like, guilty people run. Because in my head, that wasn't...
And you weren't guilty in your head?
In my head, I'm like, this is self-defense, right? But then we go back into the criminal justice system, how it treats black women, how it treats black men. You know, first offence, 2.5 years, never been in trouble before with the law. And then you go straight to jail. It's crazy, you know, and then going to jail and meeting all these other little kids. I'm 21, there's like 18-year-olds, like 16-year-olds in jail for even badder things than I'm in jail for. And I'm like, what's going on? What, yous are all here? Like, this is insane. So for me, going into the criminal justice system, it showed me, like, firstly, how easy it is to end up in a system that I was always a bit like, yeah, but you like jail, innit? You like jail.
So you never imagined you'd be there?
Never. Like, walk past Holloway, HMP Holloway, that's now closed down, and didn't even acknowledge it was a jail. Like, it's just like, that's a big wall. Let's go shopping. Like, do you understand? Like, on our way to Finsbury Park. So it's like, these experiences were something that I was kind of thrown into when I went into the criminal justice system and realised really quickly, like, okay, when you're in jail, whatever you say or do can get you in trouble. Started writing, like, and again, this is how my poetry came along. It's because I would write these little notes like, oh, the officer's racist, or the girl over there is screaming. Why is she screaming? Like, you know, these little questions I would ask myself because I, again, didn't know if I felt safe enough to say it to any other person, an officer.
So this is psychological safety you're speaking about.
Exactly.
As well.
So it's like having that fear of like, if I share it, do they start thinking that I'm soft or I'm like emotional? I don't, you know, so many different things. And obviously from then coming out and being a black, obviously youth work, like I was like, I need to stop young people from coming to this place. This place is crazy. Do you understand? And then coming out and actually building this whole Unchained movement and stuff, but then working with men who were like, prison for girls. No, it can't be the same.
Do you think the system treats girls who offend differently?
Oh yeah, we get longer sentences. Like, we get harsher sentences because we are women and we still come from that, like, a woman should be a mother, you know, you should be looking after your kids, you should be cooking, you should be cleaning, you should be married, you know, and then nobody looks at the fact that if a woman goes to jail and, you know, they have a child, that child is taken into care if the father's not there, because let's be honest, a lot of the black men have already been to jail, so the father's in jail already. Now they've removed the female version of the care for that child. The child goes into care, the woman comes out, and it's this catch-22 situation where if you don't have a home, you can't get your children back. But in order to get your children back, you have to have a home. So you're kind of stuck, right? But then that's the harsher sentence, because there's a sentence and then there's the removing your children, removing your home, you have nothing. So the sentence for women is way different nowadays than it is for men.
What do you think that says about how we approach youth violence, or how youth violence is approached generally in the country?
I honestly don't think we're doing enough to acknowledge what the problems and the issues are before this point. I think that people are just being thrown into, like, I've spoken to judges and asked them, like, why do you think you're giving longer sentences to people that are carrying knives? Again, coming back from the situation where people don't feel safe. And when you don't feel safe, you feel like you need to protect yourself. And in protecting yourself, for example, my situation, seeing my sister in that situation, nobody did anything. And I was more afraid of my mum asking me why I didn't, like, back my sister than the court system saying, like, oh, you're guilty. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, for me, going home and saying to my mum, like, I looked after my sister is great. Or going home and saying my sister's dead because I didn't. Do you understand? There's a whole situation you have to look into.
When you protected your sister, you did what was right in your family's eyes, but you went to prison for it. Did it change the way that your family saw you? I mean, did they stick by you, or did they view you differently?
Oh, yeah, 100%. My family was there. I think what happened is that my mum quickly realised that she needs to stop trusting the justice system. My mum really was like, no, you've done what you needed to do. They will see that. It's okay. It's the UK. They understand. And so for me to get sent to jail, my mum lost a lot of faith in the system that she thought she had brought her children here to protect them. Do you understand? So even till this day, she's like, you done the right thing. Do you get what I'm saying? Obviously, for her, it's more that I've kind of overcome a lot of the trauma of prison that she's more happy about. But she will never forget that the system took away her child. And had I chosen to allow the justice system to treat me, to break me, I feel like that would have rippled to my younger sisters who obviously follow suit. Do you understand? I've got a little sister who's 9 years younger than me. And when she was turning 21, she had this massive fear of, like, oh, could I go to jail? Like, because she still had the same kind of aggressive behavior where she was like, I'll still back my sister. Do you know what I'm saying? But what's happened now in my family is that I think my family's more protective of me, because they're like, well, no, we can't have her, like, have a situation. Do you understand? Like, we can't. Don't tell her nothing. Like,
She's a bite.
Don't, but then also it's led into my sisters also being a little bit more kind of like comforting to me. Like, they just look after me a little bit more, if that makes sense.
No, of course. And I love that your family stepped in. What did it take for you not to break?
Pray and write. Pray and write. Because within the criminal justice system itself, there's violence in there. So you've come from, especially if you go into jail labelled as violent, sometimes other girls want to know how violent you are. So unfortunately, if you're coming from a different background, you feel like you have to prove how violent you are. That's another test in itself. So for me, it's praying and writing. And if I didn't do that, I don't think I would be here today. I think, like I said, I would have come out and I would have been like, well, the system does what it done. So it's whatever, let's get it cracking. And then my little sisters would have followed suit. Like, my sister's like that. She's been to jail, whatever, let's get it cracking. And would have just followed and continued. And that's me trying to break the cycle of what could happen for my little sisters if I don't change. So yeah, praying, writing, and I guess just having a really good support system, because unfortunately sometimes you don't have that. And to rebuild those relationships when you've been removed from your family, and it's taken us a long time to get back to where we're all together and can sit down and nobody's like on eggshells around me. But if you don't have that, unfortunately, this is where we see the revolving doors and people coming in and out of jail, because they don't have that support system they come out to. And it's like, okay, but I broke my mum's heart when I went to jail and my mum's never healed from that. It's a hard thing to do. And I think a lot of people need to recognize that you go to jail, you get sentenced, but it's coming out of jail. That's the reality. That's where the real test starts, because you have to rebuild things that were stolen from you. We need to create, like women's centres. We need to create an alternative to sending them to a prison, like especially youth offending service is the harshest form. The violence in there is crazy. So instead of sending them there, let's have an alternative to sending them to prison. Again, funding is hard, but we can do it. Like, if we create our own pots of fund where we're like, okay, this is going to go to this part and this is going to go to this, we can create those spaces for the young people, the future generation of us.
Brilliant, thank you. I think we've put the world to rights today.
Done.
I just want to give a special thanks to my guests who joined me today, Ife Thompson, Lady Unchained, Marvyn Harrison, and of course, Ebinehita Iyere. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, please subscribe to the podcast. This is a reduced listening production for the Runnymede Trust.